Have you ever paused to reflect on what happened? Support means the world to me. Let me know how I can make future videos even better for you. Mrs. Wong was overjoyed when she heard the news that her daughter-in-law had given birth to twins. There's something profoundly heartwarming about grandchildren. Their arrival often heralds a new chapter of love and purpose. For Mrs. Wong, the birth of these two little bundles of joy brought immeasurable excitement and warmth to her heart. She saw in them tiny angels deserving of all the care and attention in the world. As any devoted grandmother would, she immediately prepared herself to help. Without hesitation, she packed her bags and made enough for their own well-being. The challenges of aging are inevitable, and as difficult as it is to accept, we must learn to value not just the love we extend, but also the love we must hold on to for ourselves. For many elderly individuals, the decision to sell their homes and move in with their children appears to be a hopeful step toward care, support, and familial closeness. It's a touching idea, filled with warmth and optimism. Parents surrounded by their loved ones and children finally reciprocating the care they once received. But the reality often falls far short of the dream. Living together can quickly ignite conflicts. Differences in habits, routines, and lifestyles can create tension where there should be harmony. Elderly parents may find themselves longing for the independence and dignity they once had, while their children, despite their best intentions, become overwhelmed by the added responsibility of caregiving. This delicate balance of love, duty, and expectation frequently leads to misunderstandings, and in some heartbreaking cases, it can shatter relationships entirely. One such story is that of an elderly couple who gave everything to their son, only to face rejection and heartbreak in return. After years of working tirelessly and dreaming of a warm and supportive family home, they were left devastated by their son's actions. The couple had their son later in life, thrilled when he became the center of their world. Their dream was to see him grow, succeed, and build a family of his own. When he married at 24, following an unplanned pregnancy, they poured their resources into his future. At his request, they tore down their modest home and used every penny of their savings, and even borrowed money, to build a new house for him and his wife. At first, they were happy to help, but after the new house was built, everything changed. Their daughter-in-law, once sweet and kind, grew increasingly irritable. Arguments began to escalate. Their son, who had always been loving and respectful, became distant and defensive. A simple mistake, spilling milk while preparing a bottle, turned into a confrontation that left Mrs. Wong accused of carelessness. When her son returned home, instead of seeking an explanation, he issued a chilling ultimatum. "If you keep making me angry, I'll have no choice but to ask you to leave." The words pierced her heart, reducing a lifetime of sacrifices to a painful sense of betrayal. As tensions grew unbearable, the couple realized they could no longer stay. They moved out, renting a small place with what little they had left. But the emotional wounds ran deep. Their son and daughter-in-law, instead of appreciating the sacrifices made for them, treated the elderly couple as a burden. Despite the pain, Mrs. Wong and her husband refused to be defeated. They hadn't yet transferred the land title of their home, and they decided to fight for what was rightfully theirs. With the help of relatives, they reclaimed their property and sought compensation for the resources they had invested in building the house. The process was grueling, but it was also empowering, a way of reclaiming their dignity and self-respect. Through sheer determination, they managed to rebuild their lives, albeit in a modest way. They paid off their debts and started over, knowing they had stood up for themselves when it mattered most. Mrs. Wong carried no regrets. The house and the land were symbols of their life's work, and she refused to let those sacrifices be erased. This story is a stark reminder that love, as powerful as it is, must be accompanied by wisdom. Sacrifices made for family should never come at the expense of one's own well-being and dignity. Aging brings its own vulnerabilities, and safeguarding oneself becomes as vital as providing for others. If you're still here and find the lessons in this story meaningful, please comment Toby below to let me know you're with me. Now my husband and I live in a small house with a little garden, surrounded by relatives, and most importantly, our grandchildren. It's a simple life, but it's a good life. We spend our old age together, finding joy in the small things and cherishing the love we still have. As for our son and daughter-in-law, let them live their lives as they wish. I've learned that sometimes you have to let go of the things you thought were important and focus on what truly matters, your peace, your happiness, and the love that remains. Mrs. Lee is a poignant example of the challenges and emotional complexities that many elderly individuals face in their later years. At 70, she lives in Suzhou, China, a city steeped in history and beauty. Yet behind the tranquil scenery, her life is far from simple. Mrs. Lee is a proud mother, deeply devoted to her daughter, the joy of her life. For years, she poured her heart into her family, working tirelessly to provide, nurturing her children with love, and sacrificing her dreams for their well-being. She never imagined that, in her old age, she would be caught in a painful emotional web with the very person she had poured so much into. It all began when her daughter gave birth to a son. At first, Mrs. Lee was overjoyed by the thought of having a grandson. She eagerly took on the role of caregiver, believing that this would be the golden chapter of her life. She imagined herself delighting in the sounds of a child's laughter, reminiscing about the days when she cared for her daughter. Yet life had other plans. The reality of taking care of a baby, especially in her later years, proved to be far more demanding than she had anticipated. The constant crying, the sleepless nights, the worry over sickness. It all became overwhelming. She had hoped for joy, but instead, she found herself drowning in exhaustion and self-doubt. What made the situation even more heartbreaking for Mrs. Lee was the way her daughter responded. Rather than showing gratitude for her sacrifices, her daughter seemed to dismiss her struggles. There were moments when she became frustrated with Mrs. Lee over trivial matters, as if everything should have been effortless for the elderly woman. The coldness and lack of empathy from the very person she had devoted her life to left Mrs. Lee feeling deeply alone. It was as though the bond they once shared was crumbling right before her eyes. The emotional weight of this was crushing. Mrs. Lee had spent her entire life believing that love, sacrifice, and family were the unshakable foundation of her world. Yet here she was, not only unappreciated, but also blamed for not meeting expectations that felt impossible. In the darkest moments, her daughter even threatened to sever their relationship, further deepening Mrs. Lee's sense of betrayal and abandonment. This heartbreaking realization was a wake-up call for Mrs. Lee, forcing her to confront a harsh truth. To live a fulfilled life, she could no longer rely solely on her family. She had to find strength within herself, reclaim her independence, and rediscover her happiness. So Mrs. Lee made the courageous decision to focus on herself. She began prioritizing her health, her well-being, and her joy. No longer would she be tethered to the demands of family life at the cost of her soul. She started engaging in activities that brought her fulfillment, joining social clubs, making new friends, and even exploring new hobbies that had once been forgotten. Slowly, she began to rediscover a sense of purpose and joy that had long been buried under the weight of duty and sacrifice. It was in this period of self-reflection and renewal that Mrs. Lee began to find peace again. As time passed, her daughter, overwhelmed by the demands of motherhood, began to understand the depth of her mother's sacrifices. She recognized that her mother had not only given up her happiness, but had also carried a heavy emotional burden for the sake of her family. The realization prompted a heartfelt apology. Her daughter acknowledged her faults, and with time, their relationship began to heal. They grew closer, more compassionate, and more appreciative of each other. Mrs. Lee's journey of self-discovery and healing ultimately brought about a reconciliation that was both deeply emotional and transformative for them both. Mrs. Lee's story serves as a powerful reminder that the love between family members requires more than just sacrifice. It demands mutual respect, understanding, and appreciation. It's a love that should be nurtured, not taken for granted. The elderly, who have given so much to their families, deserve to be seen, heard, and cared for in return. The emotional and mental well-being of our elders should not be overlooked, for they have already given us so much. Their sacrifices, often silent and unseen, deserve recognition and gratitude. This lesson extends beyond Mrs. Lee. In our own lives, we must reflect on the way we treat our parents, especially as they age. They have spent their lives supporting us, and in their later years, it is our turn to offer them the same kindness, understanding, and love. Our parents should not feel like burdens, but should instead experience the warmth of family, the joy of companionship, and the sense of belonging that they have long given us. In a small village not too far from Mrs. Lee's home, Mrs. Lan, an elderly woman over 70, faces a similar struggle. She lives with her son Min, his wife, and their 2 young children. Min and his wife are hard-working individuals, often stretching themselves thin to provide for their family. As a result, the bulk of the caregiving for the grandchildren falls on Mrs. Lan's shoulders. Much like Mrs. Lee, Mrs. Lan had hoped to enjoy a peaceful retirement, but instead, she found herself once again sacrificing her own needs for the sake of her family. While her dedication to her grandchildren is commendable, it too comes at a cost: her health, her happiness, and her sense of self. It is a situation that highlights the need for balance in family life, where the elderly are supported, appreciated, and given the space to care for themselves as they care for others. Mrs. Lee and Mrs. Lan's stories are a testament to the complexity of aging, family dynamics, and the deep emotional currents that run through our lives. They remind us that, as our loved ones grow older, they too have needs and desires, needs that go beyond physical care. They need love, understanding, and the recognition that their lives are valuable, not just for what they can give, but for who they are. As children, we must remember this, for the warmth of family is built on mutual respect and support. The true beauty of love is found in the way we honor and care for each other, no matter the stage of life. Every morning, as the first light of dawn peeks through the curtains, Mrs. Lan awakens, already thinking about the day's responsibilities. With unwavering dedication, she gets up and prepares a hearty breakfast for her entire family, setting the tone for a new day filled with care. After the morning meal, she doesn't stop. She takes her 2 beloved grandchildren to school, a task she does with a loving smile despite the fatigue she feels creeping in. Then, as if the day hasn't already been long enough, she returns to her home to tackle the never-ending list of household chores, sweeping, scrubbing, and organizing with a tireless spirit. In the afternoon, immeasurable, but those sacrifices should never come at the cost of their health or happiness. A family built on love and respect should never be one in which the elders are expected to give endlessly without time to care for themselves. Health, after all, is not a gift. It is a foundation that supports not just the elderly, but the entire family. Parents and grandparents need to understand that their well-being is essential to the happiness of the whole family. As they age, time slips away faster, and the moments once taken for granted become treasures. Yet so many parents, out of love and duty, sacrifice their time and energy to care for others, putting their own needs and rest on the back burner. Their happiness becomes secondary to the needs of others. This selflessness, while admirable, is not sustainable. We must recognize that before they became parents, our elders were individuals with their own dreams, desires, and needs. They too deserve the opportunity to nurture those aspects of themselves. Family life should be about mutual care, respect, and understanding, where the older generation can enjoy life without feeling that everything they have must be given away, with nothing left for themselves. The key to a fulfilling life, especially in later years, is to learn to take care of ourselves, to find joy in what we love, and to make space for happiness. Only then can we experience the fullness of life. Mrs. Lan's story teaches us how easy it is to lose ourselves in the care of others, especially when we love them deeply. Her selflessness, quiet sacrifices, and the strength with which she carried her family for so long are truly inspiring. But through her journey, we also learn that we must not forget to take care of ourselves. Health, happiness, and self-care are not luxuries. They are essentials for everyone, especially for those who give so much to others. After hearing Mrs. Land's story, I want to ask, what have you learned from her experience? Is there one thing that stood out to you, something you plan to start practicing in your own life? Perhaps it's taking a moment for yourself or being more mindful of the elderly in your life. Whatever it is, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share one thing you've learned and we'll start applying in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment, hit that like button, share it with others, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring content. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.